Hey everyone, it's Code Webster here. So I'm going to begin with explaining what my channel actually does and what we're going to do. So basically, I'm going to have a genius idea and I'm going to try to build that. But instead of building that on my own, I'm going to share it with my millions of subscribers and viewers. And you're going to find out how to build it as well. So we're going to go on this magical path of discovery of how to work with Rails, how to work with hundreds of different coding languages, and how to build crazy crap. All right. I'm not going to do blogs and I'm not going to do to-do lists because Jesus Christ, that has been so overdone. No one cares about the 1 millionth blog. Mark Zuckerberg had that idea 10 years ago, made a billions from it. Forget about it. So, first, before I start, if you haven't downloaded Rails and you haven't set up Rails, click on this other video. I think it's going to pop up right now, and this will help you out. This will help you set up Rails on Windows and Ubuntu. So go do that, then come right back over. All right, so before we begin, we're going to just simply explain how our app will actually work. So I've got a little picture here explaining how our architecture of our site will be. So what we'll have is we'll have a user, right? And we're going to set it up with something called Devise. I'm going to explain what that means later. And the user will have many books, right? So the books will have pages, will have a name, and you kind of review how you like that book. And that user will also have a read cycle. And so what a read cycle is basically what book you're reading right now and what your goal for that book is. And so all this has one book through, has many. I'll be explaining that while creating it. But this is basically how our site will work. But before we get ahead of ourselves, what we're going to do is we're going to reroute to whatever directory that you want to build something in, right? So I have it under Documents, Projects. So you can kind of, if I go to my Documents and go to my Projects, that's my YouTube projects. I kind of have a bunch of projects there. But you're just basically going to redirect to wherever you want. It can be the desktop if you want. But you're going to redirect there, and then you're going to type in this command, Rails new book reader. And what that will do is it will create a new app called book reader. Then you're going to type in -d MySQL, and that'll connect to our setup, MySQL. Once you do that, that will create your app in that directory. So now I've already done that, so I'm not going to do it again because it takes a bit of time, depending on your internet. Then you're going to press ls, and you should see book reader here. You're going to type in cd book reader, clear everything, ls, and that will be showing you a bunch of stuff. You don't need to know how this works right now, but that's what our journey will be about. Okay, so next what you're going to do is we're going to try to set up our MySQL user. And what MySQL basically is, I really don't know how to explain this well, but it's kind of like a framework for which you can store information, right? So where can I store my users' information in my book? And I want to retrieve that constantly. How am I going to do that? So Rails works with a bunch of gems, and gems basically allow the interaction between languages. Well, that was kind of wrong. Gems basically allow packaging of certain libraries. But in this case, what the MySQL gem will do, it'll be connecting to MySQL and Rails, and they'll basically be communicating. So you can store information in MySQL, and that information is pulled by Rails. All right. I know that's a bit confusing, but it will make a lot more sense if you work on this project with me and you work on 100 different projects. All right, so we're going to go sudo MySQL root, and that will bring up your system. It might ask you for the password. The password is the Ubuntu password, not your computer's password. If you don't understand what that means, it means you haven't installed Ubuntu. Please click on my other video to explain everything to do there. All right, now what you're going to do is basically create a user. I'm going to have create user Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan's pretty cool, at localhost identified by password, which is going to call it app123. All right, so this creates the user Joe Rogan at localhost, and it's identified by app123. Put a semicolon there, and that creates it. So it says query OK, 0 rows affected. Boom, you created that. Now we want this user, which we're going to be putting it into our book reader. I'll explain how later. To be able to do whatever the hell we want with it. So I want it to have all privileges. So basically what we're going to do is grant all privileges. Oop, I forgot how to spell. Typical tech whiz. and this will, whatever your username here, and that'll give you all privileges. Oh, I forgot the semicolon. Press semicolon always. Why is that doing that? I don't know. Let me just do that again. So let's just do that again. Grant all privileges on. Oh, I think I didn't put another semicolon. That's why. Closed. Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. All right. That created 0. So now this user has all access. So we're gonna exit that. Press exit, and it's gonna say bye. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to our Rails directory. You didn't really have to leave it, but I like leaving it. And then what you're going to do now is you're going to start to understand how we're going to actually create our schema. So if you have Visual Studio, whatever language or coding platform you use, bring it up now, and it's going to have this, right? You can download Visual Studio Code, just search it up. So what the setup for this is you have controllers, you have views, and you have databases. You also have routes. All right, so I'll explain all these different instances along the way, but basically today we're going to be mainly working with controllers, DB, views, routes, and gemfile. All right, so what you're going to type in your command line, because this is basically the easiest way to do everything, is you're going to type in Rails generate scaffold book pages string. So that means what we're going to have is pages. We're going to have a book called, well, we're going to have an item, an object called a book. It's going to have pages, which is made of a string, and we're going to have name, which is a string, and we're going to have a review, which is a string. Okay, we're also going to have maybe an author, which is a string, right? So reviews, basically a user, if he wants to review that book, he's going to type up a little review. Name basically is the name of the book. Author is the author of the book. The pages is the number of pages of the book. All of that basically is string. Once we press enter, that's going to do a bunch of data gathering. And what that basically did, if you look at here, we've got book, right? Book should have pages, it should have a name, should have a review, and it should have an author. I should have added that there. So a book is going to be part of users, right? So you've got a user has many books within him, and a user has one read size. So what we're going to do is we're going to create books through the front end, right? And it's going to store it in the MySQL backend. And that's going to be, and the front end and the back end are going to be connected through something called the Rails API. And the Rails API are controllers, right? This command, which was Rails scaffolding, what it did is it created a migration file, it created a model, created a test, you don't need to worry about that, created the routes, created the tests again, created controllers. So if we go over to controllers, which is under app controllers, book controller, you're going to have all this stuff, all this code, which you're not going to understand if you're new to Rails, but I'll explain it a lot better later on. You're also going to have a migration, and a migration basically creates the object in the MySQL system, right? So it's going to create a table, right? If you're interested in understanding tables, I'll have a theory video sometime in the future. But right now, what we're going to focus on is just practicality. You're going to have a T string, T name, T review. So it creates a table, and that table is stored in the MySQL system, and Rails through the controller, which is here, can access that by typing in @books.bookall. Another thing we like to use is called models. So you're going to go down here, models, and book.rb, and that basically, so models kind of just sets up a bunch of extra functionalities, right? So if I wanted to maybe add a function which is specific to book, I can add it here. And I could go book.getThis or something like that. We're not going to really work with models that much today. We're just going to add a bunch of lines, which will be explained later. I know I keep saying explain later, but it'll make sense. All right, so now we're also going to create the next object called pages cycle. Okay, so if I bring that up, read cycle, sorry. All right, so we're just going to type in Rails generate scaffold read cycle pages goal. string. And that's just the read cycle object which has been created, and you got a bunch of things there. So now that we've got all that, we also need to understand one more thing, right? I was talking about the architecture a bit before. So the user has one read cycle, and the user has many books, all right? If you want to try to understand that, that just means if you're one person, right? If you're a user and you log in, you have many books, but you only have one read cycle at a time, right? So I'm only reading one book at a time. You can change it later, but you can maybe call has many books, but let's just say that a user has one read cycle, all right? And he has many books. But the read cycle needs to have one book, right? Because what pages goal are we talking about? What book are we talking about? So instead of creating another book within read cycles, what we're going to say is we're going to say the read cycle has one book through the user, and the user has many books, all right? That kind of is confusing because it is really advanced architecture, but we won't be getting into it that much today, but it will make a lot more sense later in later videos. So stay tuned. So Rails has a system to actually identify if a user has many books or a user has read cycles, etc. We're going to start setting that up now. So if we go down to our migrations, right? So we know that the books there are many books per user. The user doesn't exist now, but we'll explain it. We'll set it up soon. So what we're going to do is we're going to go t dot belongs to, I think. Yeah. So what this is saying is that the book object belongs to users, right? And so what that basically means is the book here is connected to one user, right? So a book you could probably have a book that's connected to two users, but basically you'll have one to many relationships. So you'll have a user, and a user will have a bunch of books. So maybe he's reading Don Quixote or whatever. I don't know how to say that guy's name. All right, so now that we have that, we also know the read cycle belongs to user, right? So you can also put that here, and that's how Rails sees it, right? So Rails has a lot of stuff built in, and it's really powerful. I know people might be saying, "Wow, there's a lot of commands I have to remember. There's a lot of shit that's really complicated." But honestly, like if you're new and you just want to get started, read the Rails guides. Watch these videos and it'll make a lot of sense. So now you basically have that the pages goal belongs to a user and the books belongs to a user. So if you're familiar with databases, this is like a foreign key. All right. So now that we have that, we also want one more thing, and that is explaining that the user has many books and the user has one read cycle, and also the read cycle has one book through user. Yep. How Rails does that is through models, right? And I know that you're like, why isn't it working the migration? But I think it's just how it is, you know. I have no power over it. So what we're gonna go is has the book, right? So what we're gonna say about book, let's actually see the book model. What does the book model have? In fact, the book model needs nothing there because it has nothing, right? So we're next gonna go to read cycle. And we're gonna say read cycle has one book through read cycle. Let me just check quickly. I think that is the command that you're supposed to write down there. Yeah, it is. So basically you just have to write has one book through user. Now you're obviously wondering, oops. You're obviously wondering where's the user, right? So we next have to create user. Users are really hard to create, right? Because the user setup is so advanced, right? You want a user to do a lot of things. You want them to send emails. You want them to set up a sign-up page. You want to do a lot of shit, right? So what Rails has is something called the Devise gem, one of the best gems ever in Rails. I think it's been going on for years now. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in. What are we going to do first? All right. See, you know I'm not scripting this. I'm just trying to explain it as best as I can. You're going to go down here to our gem file. Oops, that's not our gem file. Is it? Yeah, yes it is. So you're going to go down here to our gem file. And this is a bunch of gems that we're using. If you look closer, you should see MySQL too, right? So that's because we typed in -d MySQL. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go down here. We're going to type in hash, which is how you use comments. You're going to say devise gem, and you're going to go add gem devise. Right, we're not going to put any version or all that crap. We're just going to go gem devise. What you're going to next do is called bundle install, and this installs all your gems. Remember, gems are kind of like libraries. So if you've ever heard of a library in other languages, it's kind of like that. If you haven't, welcome to programming. Libraries basically means I'm lazy. I don't want to write everything out, and I don't want to create the wheel again. So I'm just going to use a bunch of libraries. All right. Whew, all right. So we're gonna wait for this stuff. Maybe I should have done it before. No, bundle install's all good. So what you're next gonna type in is this, and this is just a lot of commands. Devise. But that will install Devise again for you. So that initializes Devise. So once you do that, we're gonna go to this development thing. You're gonna type in here. Where is it? It's in config. So there, config environments development.rb. And so what we're going to type in here is we're basically going to allow Devise to send emails, right? And where is it going to send email from? And we'll be using this in later tutorials. What you're going to type in is action mailer. And don't worry about how this actually works. Just type whatever is here. And if you have any questions, just ask in the comments. So we're gonna send the emails from localhost, right? And we're gonna send it from port 3000. Okay, so that just sets your mailer options. All right. So now that you've done that, what we're gonna next do is we're gonna go to our app views. Okay, so what are views? Views are basically the front end of the site, right? If I go now to Google and I'm in google.com, right? So this is the view. This obviously does a bunch of things in the back end, but right now this is the view, right? So how it looks, it's the website. In fact, I can just check what the view says by going #inspect, and I can see all the code that Google uses for the view, right? When I press search or something, right? Then when I press that, Google search, that actually sends a request to search, and that's when the backend comes in handy. So now that you know that, let us boogie. So you're going to go to application.html, which is the only views you technically should have now. Let me clean this up. That's a cool thing about Visual Studio. It just immediately does that. So you're going to go app views layouts application.html, and at the top there you're going to type in just above yield, and yield in Ruby basically means do everything, right? It's kind of a interesting object, but yield basically means, hey, everything above this. So like if you had like a HTML file in the yield, you'd have the bottom part of the file, and then you'd have the nav bar up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say whatever route I take, or whatever page I'm on, above it, I want to put a notice. And that notice will say, hey, did I get an error or not? Error handling is awesome, because it always shows you what you haven't done. All right, so bear with me. Maybe I'll speed this up a bit. Okay, the template here, I don't know if it's called Ginger, right? So it's just the Ruby template, right? So I don't know why it's doing that. So and it's going to send the notice. So if I get a notice, I'm just saying, hey, send that notice through. If I get an alert, which is basically an error, I'm just gonna have a P there. I really gotta download a bunch of stuff so it looks cooler. I'll explain what I'm writing down. Just rewrite whatever I write here, guys. Okay. Okay. So what this basically is if there's a notice, right? So if something like, hey, a new user logged on or something like that, you're gonna type in this notice. And so Ruby sets up objects, right? So this is notice object. So if you want to call an object from your controller, you gotta go percentage equals notice. And if there's an alert, similarly, right? So this thing right here is an object, right? So I don't know if you can see that. Let me just. So that's the object, and that says, hey, that's an alert. If you're confused about how this works specifically, so let's say you have a controller, right? You can you can set a notice, right? So don't worry about what it exactly means, but around here you can kind of set a notice. You could do something like notice battle or whatever it is, right? Whenever you set a notice, your views will say, hey, this guy sent a notice. What am I going to do with it? You can set the variable here. And once again, this is the first video, so you might be you might be confused with how this is actually working, but don't be. Everything will make sense, and if you follow this correctly, it will work. And if you follow my tutorials for the next couple of videos correctly, you'll have a much more thorough understanding. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create that user. So we're going to go Rails G Devise user. Okay, and that just creates the Devise user. Okay, so similarly how we did Rails scaffold, Rails generate scaffold, this does Rails generate Devise. And you can use G instead of generate for a shorter way. Okay, so once we do that, before we do the final step, let us show you, if you go to app, controllers, nothing there, which is interesting. Good views. It seems it didn't create. I thought Rails would generate views. Let me try that. Okay, yeah. So go Rails G Devise views. I don't know if you saw that, but make this full screen. Right. So that's, you put that little colon there. Okay. So now if I go to views, so go to app, views, Devise, you can see like a bunch of stuff that Devise creates. It creates a mailing system. So this is pretty cool. You can send an email to people. You get a password system. It's like, this is pretty cool. You can change the password, you get registration, all that type of stuff. So finally, we have to do the migration. Migration basically sets it in stone. So before we do that, we're going to go to our models. And the user should exist now that you pressed all that. And above everything, we're going to type in has many books. Okay, I think that's how it works. Yes, so this should work. Has many books, right? So this means, as we saw in our picture before, user has many books. He also has one read cycle. Wait a minute. Jeez. Read cycle. I think that is how that should work. Yeah, I shouldn't have called it read cycle with a capital, because it does do sometimes underscore. So it might be underscore read cycle, but regardless, this is basically how that works. All right, so what we finally have to do, and I know this is a long setup process, but that's how Rails is. Once you set it up, everything else becomes magic. You're going to go down to your database.yml. Okay. Now, I don't know where exactly that is, so I'm gonna search for that. Yeah, so that's in config. So if you go down here, config, and go down here, you get a database.yml. The reason I'm doing this is because we have to actually set our password, right? So what you're going to have is if you go back up to where you made your password, right? So we called it Joe Rogan, right? We called it Joe Rogan. So our username is Joe Rogan, and his password is app123. All right, so it's going to use that, and this is MySQL's default. So finally, what you're going to do is you're going to do the final step was Rails DB migrate. And we might get some errors. I don't know. I haven't done this right now. So if we get any errors, we'll quickly go check that out. Boom, boom, boom. So yeah, it's a bunch of code. Okay, we got an error. Unknown database. So what I think happened is I don't really have MySQL started. I might have forgot to start it. So if I go sudo service start, sudo service MySQL start, put in your Ubuntu password, starting MySQL. I think now that should work. So yeah, you'll get a bunch of errors. Just have to either if you're really confused, check Stack Overflow. Otherwise, you just have to understand how that works. All right, so now caused by unknown database. Rails aborted. Unknown database broken to default. Okay. Yeah, so in fact, I'll speed this up, but try to explain how you can actually understand our errors. So this means no database error, unknown database book reader development. Okay, you know what actually happened? Before you can migrate databases, you need to be able to create them, right? So this is a good learning experience. Rails DB create will actually create the database. So basically, I didn't have the database there. I thought I did from before. But you always have to run the Rails DB create. Then once you do that, you can do Rails DB migrate. Okay, it's going to take its time because it is a big migration. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, really just type in the comment system. I'll try to answer them. While that's loading, I'm going to try to explain the routes, how that works. So what you're going to do is you're going to go, where is routes? Let me look for that. I've got a search function. That's why I use Visual Studio. Yeah, it's in the, it is Devise.rb, no, routes.rb, yeah. So it's right there. And where is that path? We're going to show that reveal in sidebar. Yep, so as expected, it's in the config. So you're going to go config, and routes should be here. Yeah, so routes is right there. So okay, so what we're gonna have there is we're gonna change this over later, but right now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna log in and we're gonna set a root, and the root is, we're gonna call that root. Let me think of one we can use. If we go to our controller, right, and our controller is our API. Books controller, I think we have a book index, right? We don't have anything right now, but we can go root. I think that should work. Okay. All right, now let's check if ours, yeah, so I press enter there. Sometimes it gets stuck, but basically means undefined method belong to for active record. Right. Okay, so what that means is we had an error in our migration. So what you're going to do is you're going to go down to database migrations, and it says I made a typo. Yep, so it should be belongs to, and it belongs to. Okay, we're going to try that one more time. Rails DB create, Rails DB migrate. Okay, so that worked right there, right? So what that means is that you created the table books, you've created the read cycles. So once you see this, you know you're a go. All right. So that basically means everything should be working. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna have to. I think we're gonna have to. In fact, let's just show you how that works. So what you're gonna do is Rails S, and so what that does is it starts the actual server, right? So it starts at server, and it will show you where it starts. Right, so it's running Rails. So you're going to be a local host 3000. So go to your Google Chrome path, local host 3000. It's going to take its time. Webpacker compiling, as you can see pretty coolly, that the stuff is working on the side. Completed 200. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty cool, right? So this is what you should see right now, and that is our root site. Right, so if you go to routes, see Daisy there. So you go to routes. So root basically means where it starts off with. We're going to try to make that a lot more cooler later on. But for now, I think that's a good time to end the video. So I'm going to show you how you can go to this cool thing called sign in, right? So that didn't write. So what you're going to do actually is user sign in. So Rails actually created this routes for us. Okay. So you're going to have users sign in. Right, so users sign in there, right? So that actually goes here, and so that's pretty cool. So I'll just create this, right? Press remember me. Obviously I haven't created an account, so I actually have to go sign up. And just to show you how cool Rails is, I'm going to show you on the side the commands are actually being run as well. So this should be the newest command. So if I go code web.dar, and I've got a saved password from before and put my, I think that will work. Press sign up. Okay, so password confirmation, obviously that didn't work, so I'll just call it. And if you're wondering how we actually set this up, the error prohibition is actually explained if you go to your application. If you go to your application, where's views? Let's open apps, views, layouts. Right, so I'll explain yield a bit back, right? So yield is everything below, I guess everything below here, right, will be yield, and we have like maybe we change routes, right? So our yield will be everything below email, right? Just above yield we have our alerts, okay, and we have our notices. So we've got this thing, and then above that we've got the actual sign up page, which is explained through. It's just explained through. I think it's explained through somewhere, like you get the JavaScript, doesn't really matter, and you get the title book reader, which is that one. So yeah, so we're gonna go, I'll just create a random password and sign up. I'm gonna bring up Rails on the side to show that it works. Actually, you can see before that it didn't work. Rollback means, oh, it went back. Okay, so no thanks. But yeah, so I've signed up. Welcome, you've signed up successfully, and that sends me to the root directory, which is books. In fact, this is probably double notifications. We'll fix that next time. But yeah, so now you've got a simple book reader site up. You can go to any route you want. If you type in here, let's say read cycle. That didn't work. Read cycles. That gives us an error. Why is that error there? Okay, we'll fix that next time. But maybe we can fix it now. Unexpected symbol, literal. That is interesting. I wonder why we have that error. Let's go there and see what's wrong. So let's go to app, models, read cycles, book. Yeah, okay. I think this is an error that we can fix next time. But basically, it's to do with there being no books right now. We'll fix that next time. But the gist of it, it does work, and we're gonna polish this up next time. Get everything working spot. I don't know how to say that. But yeah, thanks everyone for being here with me doing this project, and we're gonna have another video next week explaining what we do